All right, welcome along to our modern overview with Randy Buehler. We are going to steam through things here. We have about 20 minutes to get through one of the largest, stupidest, craziest formats ever. So, Randy, you're going to start with a bit of history.
Sure. I mean, Modern's only been around for about 3+ years, but there's a ton of cards you can play. I mean, you look at the sets that are available in this format, and I think we've got a slide to pull them all up. I mean, it's about 11 years worth of cards, but if you're like me, you measure time by Magic sets.
Yeah.
So it's really everything since Mirrodin, and then everything since 8th edition. So core sets back to 8th. Expert level sets back to Mirrodin. That's 8,100 and I think 39 cards to choose from.
Yeah.
Quite a variety. And for me, you know, I've been wandering around, I've been talking to the teams, and there's just a million things you can do in this format. And like, I don't think anybody can, you can't break this format. Like, it's already been broken half a dozen times, maybe a dozen times. You're not gonna come up with some whole new angle because there's already 2 or 3 archetypes that attack the set from every angle. So yeah, I mean, you look at the banned and restricted list, or banned list in the case of Modern, there are cards that you're not allowed to play. So that's definitely having an impact. And you know, the big shakeup for Modern is of course the fact that Wild Nacatl legal, Bitter Blossom legal, those have been in exile for a while on the banned list, but no more Deathrite Shaman.
Okay,
and so we'll certainly talk as we go through the top 20 about the impact that that's going to have.
Let's take a little look at the ban list if we can, because there are plenty. There you see the modern format. Let's move on to the banned list, and you can see some of the cards that are not allowed. Randy's already mentioned Mirrodin. Well, that turns out that you can't play any of the artifact lands from Mirrodin. If we head across to the banned list, there you see you get your ancient dens. You're not allowed those. And as we look at that, Deathrite Shaman is new, Randy.
Definitely.
But there are so many powerful cards. You say words like Sword of the Meek. You say Hypergenesis. You say Jace the Mind Sculptor. The power on that list is incredible.
Yeah, and R&D has really managed this banned list differently than I think other formats, where you know, they definitely see the banned list for Modern as a tool to keep things fresh and interesting, and you know, make sure you're not going to get killed on turn 2. You're not going to get killed on turn 3 consistently. It's really a turn 4 format, and you know, that banned list they've been able to do that. They've taken sort of the most ridiculous stuff out, and it just leaves this format where there's, you know, 20, 25 different decks that you can play. It's really cool.
So the history takes us back to 2011. Tell us what's been going on in the world of Modern. There we see Pro Tour Philadelphia.
That was the debut. That was 2011. And you see there, Samuel Estradi. Splinter Twin, which is very much still a deck. I mean, Splinter Twin and Philadelphia had a lot more effective filtering, sort of the blue card drawing that you could use to sort of find the combo some of that has been banned, so the deck isn't quite as consistent as it was then. Countercat in second place is kind of interesting. That was a Wild Nacatl based deck. Well, Wild Nacatl is back now, so Countercat is one of the ways maybe some people took Wild Nacatl and brought back the Countercat decks. But really, when it made its debut, it was a very combo heavy format. You know, there were decks at Philadelphia that could kill on turn 2, the Infect deck in particular. And so, you know, there was a flurry of bannings after Philadelphia. You know, you go to the next Pro Tour, and you know, it's still, you know, the next Pro Tour is the one that Sifka wins with eggs.
Okay, let's take a look at Seattle, Return to Ravnica 2012. There we are.
Right, Sifka wins with the egg deck, but now you're starting to see sort of some of the more modern decks, Jund, SCAPESHIFT. You know, that Infect deck is just, you know, giant growths attacking with poison creatures. It's not really killing on turn 2. You know, the blue-white flash deck really starts to come in. The Affinity deck is sitting there in the quarterfinals. And so the format really starts to take on the shape that we're seeing nowadays.
So that's Pro Tour Return to Ravnica. So let's hit it. Let's go with Randy's top 20 decks in Modern. We're not going to hold you to any of these because I'm sure, I bet you've done some scribbling on the picks. Right?
I have, and I'm sure I've missed some of these. I'm sure that some of the rankings are off, but you know, it's fully a top 20. I started out thinking maybe I'll do a top 10, but you know, my top 20, I still had honorable mentions, like Dredgevine didn't make the cut, Delver didn't make the cut. You know, Amulet of Vigor could easily show up here as a deck. We'll maybe talk about that a little later, but the 20 decks that I have as the top 20 coming into this tournament, they do start with the Burn deck. I think you got a quick look at that slide.
Let's take a look then. So Burn, it's obviously aggro.
Yeah, I mean, it's really philosophy of fire is sort of the lingo you'll see thrown around sometimes. The idea with this
20-20-20, is that the philosophy of fire? Like 20 creatures, 20 spells, 20 land? Or
if every one of my spells does 3 damage, I only need 7 spells.
Got you.
You know, it's just like every single card in this deck is designed to deal 3 to the opponent. You know, Goblin Guide, you're really hoping for 4 or 6. You know, Keldar Marauders, you're hoping for 5. But you know, it's just Lightning Bolt, Lava Spike. Can I just burn you from 20 down to 0 and ignore what you're doing? You know, it'll have a couple of hyper-aggressive creatures, but I may not even need to deal 20 in this format. So many people are playing shock lands and fetch lands that they may start you out with a 3 to 5 point bonus there. So Dark Confidant can eat into the opponent's life total. It's definitely, it's not the most elegant strategy. It's not the most subtle strategy, but it can definitely work.
Okay, let's look at number 19. Number 19 on the list is going to be white, black tokens, and here comes Bitter Blossom.
Maybe. I mean, we'll see. Some of this is, we haven't really seen what's going to happen in this new modern format. This is definitely a place where I know people have tested this. This is a home that Bitter Blossom can potentially fit into. Lingering Souls has been a really good card in this format for a while. You can also play Spectral Possession, and you've seen some black-white tokens decks that are sort of Honor the Pure based. It seems like getting into black more, getting Bitter Blossom, and then Intangible Virtue can make everybody a little bit bigger. That's definitely one of the places you may see Bitter Blossom show up. And this deck definitely has some resiliency. Like if the opponent is showing up and planning to sort of 1-for-1 take out all your creatures, that doesn't work against Bitter Blossom. That doesn't work against Lingering Souls.
Sure.
If it takes them a card to deal with every creature and you're just spitting out this horde of tokens, it's a nice sort of resilient mid-range strategy.
Okay, that's number 19. At number 18, we have, drum roll, it's going to be MERFOK.
MERFOK. Yeah, this has been tearing up Magic Online. In particular, before the bannings, it hasn't shown up quite as much since the bannings, as people are sort of mucking around with Zoo. And if we had done this top 20 list a month ago, it might have been in the top 10, just because it's been doing so well. But basically, there are so many lords these days. Lord of Atlantis at 2 mana. Master of the Pearl Trident. You can play Phantasmal Image to copy those lords. You can play Regery. You can get 16 different Merfolk, which give all your other Merfolks +1/+1. You can play Spreading Seas to give them an island so that your entire army is effectively unblockable. Aether Vial. It's a really good aggressive deck. Maybe not quite the actual fastest deck in the format, but you get some nice tricks. You can bounce their stuff. You can go Island Walk. Spreading Seas can actually mess with their mana by turning their key multi-land into an island. So it's a pretty nice aggressive deck. I mean, if you're looking for a tribal deck, if you've always wanted to play Merfolk, that's definitely, it's a real thing.
And a deck with plenty of play to it, because sometimes aggressive decks are by the numbers. Here's my 1-drop, here's my 2-drop, here's my counterspell, there I go.
Yeah, it's a little more interactive, a little more decision intensive than just that.
Okay, we've just talked with Ari Lax, so here's his Infect deck, as it were.
Sure. Yeah, the Infect deck these days is really trying to just get through one Infect guy and then hopefully have enough Giant Growth type effects. Mutagenic Growth can give a guy +2 power without paying any mana. You can get 4 out of a Groundswell if you played a land. You can get a lot of the Giant Growth effects to just give them 10 poison counters as quickly as possible. Maybe it takes a couple of hits, maybe it only takes 1 hit. It's definitely a super scary deck. I've got it listed as aggro combo, because it really does have that sort of, fragility of you kind of got to get exactly the right combination of stuff. You got to get somebody through, you got to have the giant growths. It plays more like a combo deck than a creature deck, even though it is fundamentally a creature deck dealing damage. But something that I'm sure will show up in some numbers.
The next deck is a deck that I think for newer players is especially problematic, because as new players, we understand creatures die, they go to the graveyard, they stay there.
No, they don't stay there.
No,
what do you mean stay there? Get them out.
Off you go then.
Reanimate them. Yeah, GORYO'S Vengeance is a really powerful reanimation spell. It's just 2 mana, and it's an instant. So, not only can you get giant monsters like Grizzlebrand out of the graveyard if you haven't got them there, you can even get an Emrakul out of the graveyard. Like, if you have a way to stick Emrakul into your graveyard, it's got an ability that says reshuffled into the deck. That's designed to sort of thwart any efforts to reanimate it and cheat it into play, except GORYO'S Vengeance is an instant. So you put the Emrakul trigger on the stack, you GORYO'S Vengeance it as a response, and that brief window while Emrakul is sitting in the graveyard waiting to reshuffle, well, let's put it into play from there. So that works.
Absolutely.
And that is super powerful.
Crazy stuff.
Now, the question with this deck is really how consistent is it? Super powerful, but you know what? That's a lot of cards. I got to get it into the graveyard. I got to have the Emrakul, the GORYO'S Vengeance. Fist of Suns is one way that some people have taken to try to get it more consistent. Fist of Suns lets you play any card for Wooburg. So
white, blue, black, red, green. Yep.
Yeah. So you know what? I'll pay 5 for Emrakul.
Yeah, that seems
5 mana for Emrakul is pretty good. And you also, if you do it that way, you summoned him. So you get the Time Walk turn, too.
Well, hello to Phil Collins and Mike Rutherford. It's Genesis Wave.
Indeed. Genesis Wave is certainly a new sort of devotion-fueled deck. Nykthos in Modern hasn't made a huge impact yet, but this is definitely the place where you see people running it. You can play a bunch of sort of cheap green cards. You can take it a couple ways. You can go Burning Tree Emissary, or you can go with all of the sort of wild growth variants and sort of pile up a bunch of green enchantments on top of a forest. That can be untapped. Nykthos can be untapped. The basic idea with this deck is I'm going to generate a ton of green mana as quickly as possible, and then I'm going to sink it into a Genesis Wave. Now, Genesis Wave, if I get to 9 mana on turn 4, say, which is maybe slow, maybe turn 3, I get to 9 mana in this deck. I Genesis Wave for GGG and X, so 6, flipping over 6 cards, and the real goal there is I just want to find a way to keep going, right? I'm not planning to just put some stuff into play. I'm actually planning, if I hit Eternal Witness, I can regrowth the Genesis Wave. If I hit an additional Nykthos, well, the new Legend rule says I get to decide which one to keep.
Sure.
You keep the untapped one.
Good plan.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
Maybe you have a Burning Tree Emissary for 2 mana. Maybe you hit Garruk, and that lets you untap 2 lands, including the Nykthos, and including the thing with all the wild growths piled on top of it. So it's actually surprisingly consistent at you Genesis Wave, and then you Genesis Wave again. And the second one is usually for 20 cards, and suddenly you've got Primeval Titans, and you can kind of win on the spot. Craterhoof Behemoth will let any creature that's been in play just get giant piles of power, attack for the win.
Number 14, it's White Weenie.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways you can go with the White Weenie deck. I think that the Hate Bearer strategy is the one that people are going to do the most. The idea here is I've got aggressive creatures, right? I've got, Dryad Militant is a 2-power for 1 mana. I've got 2-power for 2 mana, but my creatures, in addition to being able to attack for 2, they can really disrupt the opponent. Thalia can, if you run into the Storm deck, they're just completely shut down. They can't afford to pay 1 extra for all of their spells. And even, a Birthing Pod deck, or even any deck just slows down because Thalia hits play. And something like Arbiter, if you can't search your library, okay, it's devastating for something like a pod deck, but even just not being able to operate your fetch lands can really put a crimp in somebody's game plan. So, you're playing creatures that are not the fastest and most aggressive weenies available, but they have these abilities that just destroy the other person's game plan.
Number 13, Gifts Rock.
Gifts Rites.
Gifts Rites, indeed.
Right. So
that was Freudian. Sorry about that.
Funny. Yeah. The Gifts Rites deck is definitely one that has gone up in value since the banning of Deathrite Shaman.
Okay.
The basic idea here is that if I Gifts Ungiven, I'm supposed to pick 4 cards, and then you tell me which 2 go into the graveyard. Well, it's actually up to 4 cards. And so if I only get 2 cards, I can go get, say, an Elish Norn and an Unburial Rites. Now you decide which two are going to go to the graveyard. Well, I only gave you 2 choices.
I'll choose Unburial Rites and Elish Norn.
You don't have any choice.
Exactly.
They go to the graveyard. Now I can flash back the Unburial Rites. Suddenly I've got Elish Norn in play on turn 4. And all your guys are dead, all my guys are gigantic. That's a really tough combo to deal with. And without Deathrite Shaman running around messing with the graveyard, this becomes a much more consistent strategy. Yeah, it's definitely a deck that may make some noise this weekend.
We are so running out of time. There's too many decks here. That's the trouble. Let's look at Tron. That's number
crazy.
12.
Yeah, this is another deck that I think has been hurt by the way the metagame has shifted. The Tron deck, the idea here is I just need to get each of the 3 Urza lands, and now that's 7 mana. 7 mana can turn into Karn Liberated, just an awesome 7-drop. And so that's your plan here. You've got the Urza lands, you've got cards like Expedition Map to go try to get this sort of awesome mana engine and just sink into whatever. It's a good deck. The problem with this deck is that it was really good against Jund, which there's a lot less of without Deathrite Shaman, and it's kind of soft to Zoo, which there's a lot more of now that you can play Wild Nacatl.
Okay.
So deck has been plummeting down my rating for whatever that's worth, but it'll still show up.
All right, here's number 11. It's Fairies.
Yeah, and this is for me kind of a reputation pick. Everybody put the Fairies deck together. Everybody thinks Fairies is going to show up. I haven't actually found the person though who's like, yeah, Fairies is awesome. Bitter Blossom is back. This is going to be great. I'm going to play Fairies. There's at least a couple copies floating around, but I maybe actually be overrating it at 11th. I feel like this is kind of a reputation pick because this deck has been so good in so many formats over the years.
Into the top 10 we go. It's Jund at 10.
Yeah, this might also be a reputation pick. Clearly, this was arguably the best deck before the bannings. But Deathrite Shaman takes a lot of the sauce out of this deck. It takes away a lot of this sort of, resiliency and the ability to kill somebody in that grindy mid-game. Deathrite Shaman did a lot for this deck. It's still got super good cards. It's efficient ways. I can disrupt your strategy. I can, draw cards with Dark Confidant. I can kill you with Tarmogoyf. It's good now. It's no longer, the top 3, top 5 deck that it used to be. 10th, I'm guessing.
Sure.
We'll see.
At 9, green-white auras, read Duke.
Yeah, this green-white auras. I've also hexproof auras, boggles. Deck goes by a lot of names. And yeah, Reed Duke at the World Championships almost won the tournament with this deck. This one, I think a lot of people are going to play this deck this weekend. I actually think this is going to show up in significant numbers. It's the kind of deck that, you know, it just attacks you from this different angle because you can't target any of the creatures. One of the things that's happened in Modern, and this was both before the bannings, and I think it's gotten even more now, is people just rely on Lightning Bolt. Like, Lightning Bolt is my removal. And, you know, the blue-white-red deck that plays Snapcaster Mage, you know, being able to Snapcaster Mage back your Lightning Bolt, that's everybody's plan for killing creatures. It doesn't work if the creatures have hexproof.
Yeah.
You start piling auras on top of them, and now that you get them out of Anger of the Gods range, this one is headed up the rankings in my mind. I definitely think this is a strategy to keep an eye on. And it's, you know, if you're looking for a deck to play at home, it's hard to attack that deck. It's really good.
Number 8, my deck of choice, Living End.
Yeah, this is another one that's good. No Deathrite Shaman to take stuff out of the graveyard. So the goal here is just, you have a bunch of creatures with cycling, whether it's land cycling or cycling, put them into the graveyard for the first 2-3 turns of the game. And then you've got 2 different Cascade spells, so 8 cards in your deck, which Cascade, and you know what? Turns out, if you play a 3-mana Cascade spell in this deck, there aren't any 2-mana spells. There aren't any 1-mana spells.
Shocker.
The only thing in the deck that will ever get flipped by that Cascade is the Living End, the one that doesn't have a mana cost. So Living End comes back. If you're playing against creature decks, all their stuff dies, all your stuff comes out. Pretty easy to win the game from there.
Okay, next, it's Storm.
Yeah, Storm is a deck that I feel like it's always lingering to like the second 5. Every Modern PT, you know, it hangs out. It's at 5%, it's at 8%. You know, it's got some awesome pilots. You know, John Finkel is known to love this deck. The idea here is that with Pyromancer's Ascension, you know, I can just kind of craft this hand of sort of cheap card drawing things. I can get a couple counters on the Pyromancer's Ascension since that everything's forking. You know, I can play 15, 20 spells on turn 3, turn 4, and just kill with Grape Shot. You know, it's not the most powerful Storm deck there has been over the years, but it's still good enough to get the job done.
Let's stay with combo. Let's go to Scapeshift.
Yeah, I think we'll see more of this than the Storm deck. I think Scapeshift is, you know, all you have to do is not die for a couple turns and ramp your mana up to the point where you can cast Scapeshift. That lets you sacrifice all your lands. If you've got 7 of them, well, you can go get Valakut and 6 mountains. That's 18 damage. That's probably good enough. You know, if they've taken no damage from their land somehow, maybe you need to deal 21, you know, okay, now you have to get to 8 mana. But between Primeval Titan, between all of the rampant growth type effects in this spell, and this is a deck that will play Anger of the Gods. Like, it'll just, it used to play Pyroclasm, but with Nicodle being
we want to deal 3.
Yeah, the Pyroclasm doesn't get the job done anymore. It's part of the reason the Tron deck's struggling. It also relied on Pyroclasm. Okay, Anger the Gods, just hold you off long enough. If I can get to 7 or 8 lands and cast Scapeshift, I just win on the spot with Valakut.
Number 5, talking of winning on the spot, is Splinter Twin.
Right, Splinter Twin has been one of the best couple decks in Modern basically since the invention of the format.
Yeah.
I've got it down at number 5, and so the basic idea here is you get Pestermite or you get Deceiver Exarch. You get a creature which, when it comes into play, untaps a creature. Okay, well, great. Now Splinter Twin says if I tap a creature, I get to make a copy that has haste until the end of the turn. So I tap the creature, I make another one. Oh, I untap the thing that's wearing the Splinter Twin, and it's a 2-card loop that makes however many copies of that creature you want. They're all haste, and so they attack. 2-card combo that essentially wins the game on the spot. Quite a good deck. The only problem with the deck is that everybody knows it's coming. Everybody knows that they need to keep their removal spell available. And so if I, you know, fire in a Path to Exile or some way to break up the combo in the middle of while you're trying to go off, it falls apart. Now, the Splinter Twin decks have done kind of an interesting thing in the last couple months is they've become really blue-red control decks, and they can win without the combo. You know, what you know, Grim Lavamancer can deal some damage. You know, Vendilion Click is a 3-power flyer that can just kind of chip away. I can Lightning Bolt, I can Snapcaster my Lightning Bolts, and so they're capable of dealing 20 damage without the combo. I think, though, the reason I dropped them to 5 is it's the Zoo decks. It's Wild Nicodle. You know, Grim Lavamancer can no longer be relied on to kill all of their creatures.
Sure.
So now, as the creature decks go up a little bigger, now you have to go to Anger the Gods. Well, that can't really double as player removal. I just think that the metagame isn't set up as well for Splinter Twin, but still a super powerful strategy and worthy of a top 5 spot.
Okay, top 4, let's get aggressive. Let's have some affinity for robots.
So good. Yeah, your deck is all artifacts, and so you've got Cranial Plating to take advantage of that, and you've got Archdon Ravager to take advantage of that. As long as you draw one of those two cards, the fact that everything in your deck is a super cheap artifact means you have these incredibly powerful things. Attack the opponent. Everybody knows it's coming. If people want to, they can load up on sideboard cards and beat you, but super powerful, super effective strategy.
Okay, let's go into the top 3, and it's the return of Zoo.
Yeah, absolutely. There are going to be lots of Wild Nakados being played here. It's better than anything you can do for 1 mana. 1 mana for a 3/3 it's just off the curve.
Yeah.
It's off, and any opponent who wants to be reactive and wants to kind of trade or block or remove your stuff, it's the most powerful thing you can do for 1 mana in the format. So, the question with Zoo is really, do you go super aggressive or do you kind of try to go bigger? Are you Brian Kibler with like his Pro Tour Austin deck, where he went all the way up to Baneslayer Angel because he wanted to be a little bit slower and bigger than the other Zoo decks? Or do you go super aggressive so that you can win the game as fast as possible in front of the combo decks? A couple different ways you can take the Zoo build, but all of it comes down to, I have fetch lands, I can fetch whatever lands that I want, my Nakado's always a 3/3, and some people are even playing Tribal Flames because they can just get all 5 land types by turn 3, and that's just 2 mana, 5 damage.
Okay, top 2, blue, white, red, mid-range control, you call it?
Mid-range, control, flash. It's hard to call this one deck. For me, it's kind of a spectrum of decks. And for me, the spectrum really starts at just blue-red super aggressive. That's essentially the Delver deck. You can play the legacy staple Delver of Secrets in sort of a blue-red deck. That's turbo aggro. Oh, but then you can play white, and you can put in Geist of St. Traft, you can put in Path to Exile. Maybe you have a little more ability to interact with them, and Geist can be hard to deal with. Oh, but at that point, you could be playing Blade Splicer, you could be playing Restoration Angel. You can have this sort of mid-rangey, tempo-y deck, but then you can also go all the way up to Sphinx's Revelation. You can say, I'm control-ish. So it's like, if you look at the creature set, do you have Geist, do you have Restoration Angel? That's kind of, am I tempo, am I control? But that whole mess of decks, what they all have is they all have Lightning Bolt, they all have Snapcaster Mage, they all have Mana Leak. The aggressive ones have Remand, the slow ones have Cryptic Command. So you've got permission, you've got removal, you've got very efficient creatures, and you can do it all on your opponent's turn because so many of the creatures have flash. So very good strategy that matches up well against everything that's out there.
And finally, we had draft pods all morning. Are we going to have constructed pod all afternoon?
I think so. This is my pick for the best deck in the format. I think that the pod decks were very good. They lost Deathrite Shaman. That's both good and bad. It may force them to be a little more combo-y. Like Deathrite Shaman, the deck was super effective because it has combo kills, but it doesn't need the combo to kill you. It can just play this mid-range grindy deck where, I block your Wild Nakado with my Kitchen Finks. I gain more life. My creature comes back again. It's full of these 2-for-1s that are super hard for anybody to slog through. And so it's capable of winning a lot of mid-range games in the mid-range. Maybe not as easy without Deathrite Shaman, but oh, by the way, you're also a combo deck. And there's really 2 flavors. There's the Melira combo, and then there's the Kiki Pod combo. Right. So a lot of players will just take essentially the Splinter Twin combo. If you put Kiki Jiki into the deck, you can combo that with search up the 1 Exarch, maybe have a Restoration Angel. So there's a lot of ways to get the sort of infinite copies of the untapping creature in the Kiki Pod deck. Or you can go Melira Pod, and you can throw in the ability to have Melira mean your persist creatures don't pick up -1/-1 counters whenever you sack them, so they come back at full power. That makes infinite loops. Throw in Spike Feeder Archangel of Thune. There's so much.
Infinite loops. That's what we're talking about.
They're good. They're good.
Wow, from 20 down to 1. That was the modern overview with Randy Buehler.
Should be fun.